welcome to the Intuitive Insights podcast series. I'm Nina Lockwood, founder and director of Intuitive Interim and Executive Search. Throughout this series, I will be sharing engaging conversations with talented leaders from across the UK transport sector. I am delighted to welcome Mike Gray to this week's episode of the Intuitive Insights podcast. Mike Gray is a railway industry consultant specialising in IT and mobile communications. It's fair to say that Mike's brain works very differently to mine, and I'm delighted to say that I understood it all. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I hope you learn as much as I did and that you enjoy it too. Thanks for joining us. Mike Gray, a very, very warm welcome to the Intuitive Insights podcast. I am delighted that you've been able to join me. I've been looking forward to this for ages. It feels like so long since we booked it in, and now we're finally here. For those people who don't know who you are and what you do, then we're going to find out much more about that. But I'll introduce you as a rail industry consultant who specialises in technology, innovation, and mobile communications, which we might get a little bit provocative about later on in the conversation. In time-honoured fashion, I'm going to hand over to you and really love to hear your career story. What brought you into this industry? Where did you start and where are you today? What are you up to?
Wow. Okay. Where do we begin? I think my story begins on a platform in the northeast of England at the age of about 3 or 4 years old, watching an old BR Class 100 DMU roll into our single platform regional station with my dad, waiting for my mum, who was working at the time, to come out of work. And I think the very first time I saw that train, that was it for me. And from that point onwards, I've loved the rail industry and always wanted to be part of it. My father, on the other hand, wasn't a fan of the rail industry at the time. This is going back quite a lot of years back. I'm nearly 50 now, so this is proper blue and grey BR. He didn't think that was the right place for me to be as I grew up, and he pushed me very hard into the world of computers from a very, very young age. And about the age 6, I was starting to program computers. My dad actually bought me a computer, a little Sinclair Spectrum thing, and at that time you could buy a magazine, and you had to literally spend hours and hours inputting the code letter by letter to play a game. So if you wanted to do anything fun, you had to learn how to code. So we spent most of my very young years actually doing that, which is relatively unusual, I'm told, for people that young to be doing it. But that's how I grew up. Very heavily driven by my father, who actually worked for GEC. He was one of the directors of one of the GEC companies. So he was very into where technology was going kind of thing. His job was very technological. You could see the trends. You could see computers going to be huge. So it's very much, Mike, you've got to be in computers. I wasn't that bothered about computers, but I was actually quite good at them. So it wasn't my interest. I still love trains. So I still spent most of my time trying to show my dad that I could work in the railway world. I was constantly being pushed away from it. So eventually I went to university, and I didn't go to university to do a computing degree, much to my dad's disappointment. I went to university to do a business degree because my reasoning was I could do the computer bit. The bit that I couldn't do was the business bit. I didn't understand how business worked. So I went and did a university degree on business. The aim at that time was actually to start my own company. I wanted to go off and build my own business in the technology sector. That didn't happen. I got recruited by a company which eventually became Hewlett Packard, but it was Digital Equipment Corp when I got recruited. Then it became Compact Computer, then it became HP. I got recruited by them, and they got me basically in the world of very large industrial IT and technology, and building the computers that drove nuclear power stations and very large pieces of infrastructure. So I spent quite a good chunk of my career, nearly 15 years in total, in that sector doing that kind of work. So managing, strategically planning big technology transformation projects for big companies. And I got to work with some incredible people, got to go to some unbelievable places. Remember looking after Jaguar, Land Rover and Ford and going around all the big manufacturing plants. And to be able to go into those environments is just an incredible place to see how things are made and put together and how things work. But I still hankered after rail. So I created this situation in my career where I started to look after more and more of the train companies. And I guess this is where privatization and the franchise will help me, because privatization created an opportunity for me to start talking to the railway operating businesses and Network Rail as it became. So that allowed me to start moving my career towards the transport and particularly the rail sector by, in my current career, specialising in that area. And it got to a point where I was really getting quite bored of being in a big corporate company, and I was hankering after running my own business again. And working for one of my sort of clients, as it were, at the time, which on the rail operating businesses, they had an opportunity in their franchise bidding team. So I basically quit my big corporate career and decided to go and be a freelance contractor in rail franchise bidding, which was quite a number of years ago now. And to be honest, best decision I ever made. Right. It has been the most fun part of my career, working in the rail industry from that perspective. And I think a lot of people think they can't work in rail because they're not engineers, or they don't drive a train, or they're not selling tickets. So they think, well, I can't do that job. Actually, I do none of those things. I'm an IT guy. I'm a technologist. I'm a strategist, and I work in innovation. I work on long-term, very large-scale, long-term projects. And I don't drive a train, as much as I quite like to, but I don't. So there's lots of career opportunity, and there's lots of ways to get into rail. And I got into rail through the route of rail franchise bidding, which maybe we'll see come back again at some point in the future. But there are lots of ways to work for railways that don't actually involve the more general kind of job role routes that you normally associate with industry, and allow you to be the person who is looking at it from a very different perspective, not the day-to-day operations, but where do we take the railways in the future, and be part of that future vision. It's where I spend most of my time. I mean, that as a potted career history basically took me through many franchise bids, most of the franchises in the UK and actually abroad. So I've been to Sweden and the Netherlands and to Israel doing what's termed competitive benchmarking of those railways for their technology. So I've in all three of those countries, I've worked with the local national operators on the technology strategy, where they're headed with it, and benchmarked it against the UK rail industry and given them some feedback on what they should or should be doing versus our industry, which we're still held up as leaders in railways in the world. So that was a very entertaining exercise. And I do every now and again get to talk to my French colleagues, my German colleagues, and my American colleagues in the railway technology world, because we're all trying to run railways. Yes. And railway technology is relatively globally common. So spend a lot of time looking outwards from the UK into the wider world to see how other countries are running their railways and what technology they're using and how it's being done, which is a great insight to bring back to our world and go, we're pretty good, actually. We're actually doing pretty well. We're still out there right at the front when it comes to technology and railway operations. And we've got a lot to teach the rest of the world, actually, still. So yes, where did I get to in my career? So now, these days, I'm mostly working on mobile comms projects, which is Wi-Fi on trains, which is very topical. And how do we get Wi-Fi on trains to work? And I guess that's probably the next best place to go with this, because it's very topical in the news right now, because the government, in their infinite wisdom, have decided that we should probably reevaluate why we're putting Wi-Fi on trains. And I'm going to be quite controversial, so I actually agree with them.
You are being controversial there, definitely. That's good. That's good.
Yeah. Before the government made the announcement, I was already writing a paper that said probably shouldn't be offering Wi-Fi in every train. Okay. I know this isn't politically what you want to hear, but this is kind of where we are.
But and I'm really interested to know your thought process there, because there was definitely, myself included, a real knee-jerk reaction to this announcement that the government are taking Wi-Fi off the trains, because that feels like, coming from my background, which was all around customer experience.
Yeah.
should we not be looking for ways to make it better rather than taking something away? So I'm really looking forward to hearing your rationale on this.
Right. So I've spent most of my career advocating Wi-Fi on trains. Most of my career, way before it was mandated in 2018 that every train had to have it. I was saying we need to make this a better product. I was in the customer experience team in the franchise bidding world, and the whole team was completely universally agreed: need better Wi-Fi in stations, better Wi-Fi on trains, better customer experience. That's what all the surveys said as well. Lots of feedback from government and from the public themselves and the regional stakeholders. That's what we need: better Wi-Fi. When you actually unpick it and you look at the studies that are being done now, particularly after COVID, Wi-Fi is really important, but it's important in a very narrow context. And we keep having to remind ourselves of this, right? So you and I are using Wi-Fi now to do this call. We're both in nice, comfortable, warm environments. We're sat down, we're using our laptop probably, and we've got facilities around us. We feel safe. So you can sit down and can do some really productive tasks in that kind of set of circumstances. And in the railway, those occur in waiting rooms, on station retail and cafe bars. They occur in nice, comfortable coaches where you've got some space, you've got a seat, you've got a table. Doing a reasonably long journey, you're not on there for 5 minutes. So if you think about the need state when we go to Wi-Fi, it's all those things. And if we're not in that need state, and let's go to the other end of the spectrum, let's talk about maybe the Tube or the Elizabeth line, or a very short, you get on, you're on there for 5 minutes, you get off again. You're not getting your laptop out. You're not doing Zoom calls. You're not trying to do some Excel spreadsheets. I mean, it's an entirely different need state. You're on there to move from A to B. But what you might do is get your mobile phone out and look at Instagram or look at your email or do something which is very mobile centric.
Yeah.
In which case Wi-Fi isn't really that useful because you spend a lot of time trying to log on to it. And it's still a bit fiddly in terms of the user experience, despite all our efforts to make it easier. So you typically want 4G or 5G to do those kind of things. And Transport for London, good for them, have actually decided to pull Wi-Fi out of their stations. The Wi-Fi in the stations is being turned off. If you travel on the Tube now, and by the end of this year, you'll have 4G and 5G in all the tunnels and all the stations, right, which is what you need for a journey on the Underground. That's exactly what the passenger and the consumer want. So we need to look at Wi-Fi and where we're spending the money as an industry and what need state does it serve. Well, so there's a very strong business case for Wi-Fi on LNER or GWR's long distance services or Avanti's long distance service. That's where you need Wi-Fi. Those are the long journeys. Nice in comfortable environments, got a seat most of the time. That's where you need Wi-Fi. What you probably don't need Wi-Fi for is the much shorter journeys, even out in the regions in Wales or in Scotland, where you're only on the train for a relatively short period of time. And you might not really have the right environment in order to sit down and be comfortable to use a laptop. Those environments, you're much better off trying to solve the mobile phone signal. We've got to remember that Wi-Fi is driven by the mobile phone signal. So the way we get Wi-Fi on the trains is through the mobile signal. So if there's no mobile signal, the Wi-Fi on the train doesn't work. And I regularly hear, why don't we use Starlink, or why don't we use satellite communications instead of mobile signal? And in a very narrow set of circumstances, that kind of stuff will probably work. It would work in the much more regional, rural environments that we have, bits of Wales, bits of Scotland, bits of England where the little 1.5x units are running around with a handful of people on. If you want to provide Wi-Fi to those guys, then Starlink might be the answer. But it's certainly not going to be the answer for much longer, higher loaded trains. Trains doing much longer journeys, people where you're wanting to do Netflix or wanting to do more heavy, data heavy kind of activity. So we have to solve those problems differently. In fact, a research study I did just over a year ago now said that a high-speed train in the UK would probably need over a gigabit of data between it and the shore to cover all the passengers want for a reasonably loaded train. And that will get bigger and bigger and bigger as time moves forwards. And by the mid sort of 2030s, 2040s timeframe, that'll be 5 gigabits per second of data that'll need to move from the train to the outside world. to keep people happy in terms of the things they want to do, which is quite a lot. It's way beyond our current set of technologies. So we, as an industry, have got this problem that's coming down the track, if you like, of we could fix Wi-Fi, but firstly, the public aren't universally wanting that. So most of them are actually wanting mobile phone signal. Our Wi-Fi is driven by mobile phone signal mainly, and where we actually need Wi-Fi is on the long distance trains. So we're wasting our time delivering all the rest of them. I got some stats that actually show that. So my position back in this paper before the government made their announcement was very much, we're spending a lot of money making people pretty unhappy promising Wi-Fi, which we then don't deliver on these trains. So we should probably stop doing that, because that's not good customer experience. Now, if we're going to say we're going to do something, we do it. So if we're offering a service, we should deliver on that service, or we should stop spending money on it. And my view was that we should stop spending money on Wi-Fi everywhere and actually focus the spend on Wi-Fi in the places it was very, very useful to us and made a difference to those passengers, and they valued it, which was the long distance trains. And the only genuine way of answering the problem, and again, worked on this for nearly a decade, you have to build infrastructure on the railways. And this is, I guess, where one of my big wishes, so my first big wish is that GBR, when it comes into existence, as soon as possible, please, can we scope out and build a railway-focused mobile phone infrastructure for the mainline network? And I've said this a number of times to people in the industry. We've got FRMCS coming down the track, so the replacement to GSMR, because GSMR's life is up around 2035, which I know is a long way off, but it's in the railway terms. You can start thinking about it.
Yes, absolutely.
So with GSMR coming to an end, and over in Europe, they're starting to deploy FRMCS, so what we'll do next year, we should start thinking about, well, if we're going to have to spend all this money replacing GSMR, which is a 2G mobile phone system, and FRMCS is based on 4G and 5G technology, and let's just say that figure's about £3 billion. Let's replace all of it in the UK. Well, if I'm going to spend £3 billion, I'd quite like to get a bit more return on my investment. So if I'm going to do that, why don't I build a public mobile phone system for the railway that is also capable of delivering the FRMCS signal? Now, there's a business case in that. There's a commercial wrap in terms that you could construct that says, rather than the UK government spending £3 billion on it, we could actually give it to a third party to deliver as a service, delivering both FRMCS and mobile coverage, so we get lots more return on our investments. And if we're to believe PDFH, which is the Passenger Demand Forecasting Handbook, which tells all the railway what they can charge for their fares based on what they offer as a service, if we believe that, then there's value in delivering Wi-Fi, and there's value in delivering mobile phone signal, which you can reflect in your fares. And if you take that logical train of thought through, my wish would be, well, all that money that we can generate by doing a better job of mobile phone signal and Wi-Fi can be reflected in better fares revenue. Well, that should be invested back into infrastructure, which is long-term infrastructure. It's 10, 15, 20-year investment. There's a good business case for us to take that approach, which would then fundamentally solve the public want for mobile phone signal and the railway's need for operational telecoms. The railway needs radio connectivity, train to shore as well. So that would be one of my big wishes, is that an organisation like GBR could take that and grasp that particularly large and difficult commercial project and go, we as an entity are big enough now and have a national scale focus and can see the big strategic plan to start making those investments. And if I'm being honest, the place you start with this is the West Coast Main Line, because at some point HS2 arrives. And I'm fairly sure it's public domain knowledge that HS2 will build a dedicated mobile phone network inside the new sections. There's lots of tunnels and cuttings. It needs to build its own dedicated mobile phone system. So on HS2, we'll have this beautiful, really consistent mobile phone signal all the way from London to Birmingham. But as soon as it hits the old network, the classic network, it'll drop off cliff back to best endeavors. So you probably want to start focusing your investment on this new infrastructure on the West Coast Main Line, so that those services have consistency. Plus, West Coast Main Line North is also coming around for some major refurbishment work around signalling and telecom. So again, logical that you move that to this new base of technology, and you go help Dave Horn's organisation out in LNER and Mark's GWR operation by building out on those networks too, which would give those businesses much better customer experience. But to do that, I think we probably need to stop spending it in the other areas, which might be politically difficult because those regions won't want you to stop spending on Wi-Fi. But if the Wi-Fi doesn't work, is that not a legitimate position to take?
Absolutely. I think that I completely agree with the comment that you've made in terms of if we're promising something, but we're not delivering it, then just stop promising it. Because I know I use the West Coast regularly to go from Preston down to Euston, and I would prefer not to use the Wi-Fi because I get so frustrated that it just keeps dropping out and you have to then dial back in. And it's kind of, it drives me crackers. So I just prefer not to do it. What I'm also hearing you say here, which makes so much sense, is for the railway to think outside of itself in terms of that business case. So instead of just thinking about the track and the train and the passengers that we carry on our services, what can we do in collaboration with other industries, with other bodies, which can help the passengers, but not necessarily just when they're on the train? So how do we do that? How do we kind of collaborate with others and look at the bigger picture and that whole railway as a system, where it's the whole thing, looking at it as you've just explained it so beautifully to someone who hasn't got an IT brain at all? It just feels like, well, why are we not doing that then? Because it just feels like common sense. It feels like complete common sense.
I can't explain to you why. That's a bit more politically loaded, but everything in investment requires an understanding of who's going to pay for it and who benefits from it. And this is where, again, we're back to GBR. Big fan of GBR. I think it's the right move broadly for the UK industry. We need someone to take ownership of it that owns the track and the train, because that's where we get into this difficult conversation about who pays and who benefits. Because effectively Network Rail would have to build the project because it's so, the infrastructure is effectively on the railway. It's on the railway line of route. But the benefits with the railway operator, so the fare box benefits. So how do you charge or create a commercial model that works? Well, you could uplift your track access charges, but that's not really probably the way to go with it. Whereas if you've got GBR looking at it in an entirety, you can take a different view of the commercial proposition and construct a model that says we will make this investment because we as GBR see the return for it, and we can do it in the context of the strategic plan and where train service will run, where we expect passenger numbers to grow, etc., etc. So GBR makes sense and act as a body to own this as a project. I think that's been our problem actually as an industry for the last 20 odd years. You need a body that can take on a project like that, who isn't the operator of the track, who isn't the operator of the train necessarily, but is able to look at the two things in context. And we need that. We do need that as an industry to there's quite a number of projects that fit into that awkward who pays for this, who benefits for it kind of debate.
A great first wish, actually, and really different. So, there are some common themes when I'm having these conversations that people are kind of wanting to focus on. And what you've explained to us there is something that's quite different. And I've really enjoyed hearing that one. You've got two left. So you've got two wishes still to take. What would you like to wish for?
Well, I suppose my second wish has got to be, and again, controversial view. I quite liked franchising. I know. I know. I worked in the teams, so I saw the good that the teams are trying to do, and I saw the positives that the process created. It did get broken. I'm going to agree with the decision to stop it and move away from it was the right one. But franchising delivered a lot of good things, and a lot of those things took a while to filter through. We are now starting to see quite a lot of very positive things from the franchising process coming through. Yes, it had its problems. Let's not ignore that fact. It had its problems, but the thought process of sitting down, looking at the genuine needs of the passengers in an area, defining what the real requirements were of that local group, talking to the stakeholders, the really detailed engagement, and the replanning of that service very much around those people and what they wanted, and then delivering that as a product which was packaged and branded so people knew what they were buying. Actually, all those things aren't bad things. I mean, Merseyrail, as an example, incredible operation, nice branding, really focused on its regional stakeholders. A real example of a really well-run operation. It's a franchise. It is working. It was a well-designed franchise. It's a very effective franchise model. And Transport for London, they've obviously got a franchise model with Arriva over Overground. Again, intensely successful model.
Yeah.
So if we can actually point to franchises that work, I do think I actually think we've got 3 railways in the UK. Right, bear with me.
Yeah.
There's 3 distinct railways at least. Let's start with freight. So national network delivering freight is in itself really a system of its own creation. It's a commercial system. It's very competitive. It's working really well. And I feel for the freight operators, because what they really should be able to do is go, I need to go from A to B. Give me a route.
Yeah.
We almost need to get to a world where any freight operator can pretty much dial in and go, is there a route free? And just be able to get routes between A and B to serve their customers, like the national freight haulers do with the road network. It should be that easy for them. And that's, I know it's easy to say, it's incredibly hard to do. The route clearances and the driver route knowledge is difficult to crack, but there's a vision there.
Right.
And I think as a country, for net zero, we need to be pushing freight on the rail much harder than we are, which does mean, well, we'll come on to my third wish that's related to this in a minute, but freight is a railway of itself. Then you've got the regions, so the passenger operations that serve the economies, that take people to work, that take kids to school, that take people on their evenings out or their day trips. Those networks are largely public good, and they serve GDP growth. They probably won't make you any money, they might even lose money, but you do them because the infrastructure and our society needs them.
Yeah.
And you'd run those in a very distinct way. And then the final railway we have, which I'm quite passionate about these days, is the long distance world, which should be competitive. We've got some our East Coast Main Line, what's happening with Lumo and Grand Central trains, etc. There's obviously a benefit to competition, which is taking market share from the airlines. And finally, we're actually seeing it come together on that route to say, we're actually hurting the airlines now. We're taking away market share from them. We're not doing that because we're terrible. We're doing that because we've got a much better product. And that's the way we need to be looking at how do I get the long distance operations to have some genuine competition? Because it's good for passenger, it's good for us as an economy, and actually those guys make money.
Yeah,
it's a railway that supports itself.
Yeah, I think the open access. I literally. Over the last, if I just think about the last month, the industry meetings that I've been in, kind of general discussions from, kind of 15 people around the table with Hugh Merriman. I was privileged to go and take part in this in the Walmart Transport Lunch, to then being part of the National Rail Award judging committee. And over again, people are noticing what's different on the East Coast. And it's really, really fascinating for me, having been in the industry just over 10 years, to not hearing about open access at all. And then literally in the last year, probably, the momentum starting to build to the point now where literally, I don't know, I would say the majority of conversations that I'm privy to are mentioning open access. It's really interesting, that competition space. So much opportunity there. And like you say, around, obviously you mentioned net zero in connection with the freight piece, But in that whole kind of modal shift piece, yeah, we're so taking people off the airlines, but then also becoming more attractive to people leaving the car at home, come and get on the train and do it that way. So it's so important that we get better at this, isn't it? Gosh, yeah, so much to talk about there. Third wish. What
right.
for your last one?
Electrification.
Yeah.
I'm quite big on decarbonisation and the environment. To be honest, this summer, particularly what's happening with sea temperatures, should terrify you. Yeah, we need to be doing something now about that. Electrification and the work done on the decarbonisation strategy and electrification strategy already completely points the way to what we need to be doing. It's quite frustrating actually to realise that we're just not getting on with it. It's pretty clear what we need to do. So I'm almost begging for them to relook at that. You need to move very quickly on electrification now, and we could have 90+% of freight being moved under the wires just from a few relatively modest projects. If we just cracked on with them. I mean, I'm struggling with it. We've got all the reports.
Yeah.
We know what we have to do.
Yeah.
You need to do it now. You need to start committing it.
Mike? Where do you think the blocker is?
Yeah, I'm struggling with it because I don't know why we wouldn't want to do it. It makes as someone who does strategy and looks at business cases all the time. That perplexes me entirely. It's a no-brainer in my head. I'm sure.
And everyone, I think the industry is in total agreement that this is the way that we should be going. But for some reason we don't seem to. And is it funding? Are we coming back to the same issue in terms of, we can't afford to do that, or it's not, maybe it's just not a priority then? I don't know the answer to that one, and we're definitely not going to get to the bottom of it in this conversation, but I'm fascinated because everybody thinks it's the right idea. Everybody I speak to says it's the right thing to do, but it doesn't seem to be happening. I'm going to bring us on to our kind of third and final part of our podcast conversation. Before I do that, you took me through your career story, and I loved listening to that. I'm always fascinated when somebody says to me, stood on a platform, aged 3 or 4 years old, saw a train, and kind of, I know these were not your words, but my words, I fell in love with the railway. Mark Hopwood said exactly the same to me when he came on the podcast. It was kind of at that age, it was kind of knowing that I want to be involved in this. But as you've said, you were, influenced by your dad's aspirations for your career. Was he happy with the route that you took? Was he pleased in terms of kind of ticking that technology box, because you've absolutely done that, but you've clearly combined it with the passion that you had for the railway?
Yeah, I think he is. It's I think he's surprised actually, and he's surprised that I can do this job in the railways, and that's probably one of the biggest things that I'd like. Yeah, I mean, the intellectual challenge of this job is incredible.
Yeah,
you can't get it anywhere else, and I've worked in lots of different other areas. The railways give you really, in terms of intelligence, kind of puzzle to solve, that they throw you the best problems.
Yeah,
it's the most fun environment to try and operate in, because they're fun problems to try and solve. They're complicated, they're difficult, but the rewards are high, and you can see the results of your work really quickly. You can get on a train and go see. Yes. So I'd highly recommend it as an industry to work in, and I think hopefully my dad sees I'm far happier doing this than I was doing some of the other stuff I used to do.
Yeah.
And along my hopefully stay in this industry and try and work within it, because I do love it.
You've clearly got a passion for it. I think so. The third and final part of the conversation is where I ask you what inspires you. And this might be because what I don't want to do is miss the opportunity to talk to you about the Brio project that you're doing. This might be it might be one and the same answer. I don't know, so I don't want to put words in your mouth. But tell me, I'd like to know where you get your inspiration from. I'd also really like to know about the Brio project that you've done.
Right. Where do I get my inspiration? Well, these days my little boy gives my inspiration. He's just about to turn 6, so to be honest, he gives me a lot of inspiration, and he drives me actually, in a lot of ways, in terms of not it's thinking about his future, thinking about the world he's going to grow up in, and the responsibility we have to make sure that that world is not a big problem for them and his generation. But yeah, he's my inspiration at the moment. I mean, in my past though, passion for the industry inspires me. I like seeing the outcomes. I think I'm a little bit autistic myself. In fact, I'm being assessed right now for whether I'm autistic or not, because obviously when I was a kid, it wasn't a thing. No one really knew what it was. So watching my little boy and him grow up, going, yeah, I did that as a kid. So I'm probably autistic too. I think the fascination with railways and systems is inspirational. It's actually watching things work, seeing how things operate, getting behind those things. It is quite. It drives you because you can see the effects of what you're doing, and that motivates me. That makes sense as an answer.
Yes, it does.
Yeah,
it does.
So it's not from books. It's not from anything like that. But it's very much seeing the system work and understanding, trying to get behind why it's not working the way you expected it to. The problems motivate you.
Yeah.
So
and that's definitely how your brain is wired, isn't it? And that's not how my brain is wired. And I'm so fascinated by people who and all of us, obviously our brains are wired differently. And that beautiful video animation that you shared on LinkedIn yesterday was just the perfect kind of like explanation of from an autistic person's perspective and they literally had an image, didn't they, with the wires going in. It just worked perfectly in terms of a really simple explanation of how that is. I feel like in a real privileged position because I get to speak to people like you whose brain does work very different to mine. I find it fascinating.
I think we'll probably find, if we were to test the industry, a higher proportion of the industry are in the autistic spectrum than you might first imagine. It's long been held as a belief that the rail industry houses quite an undiagnosed population. I mean, if you think about some of the drivers, and I'm privileged to know some incredible railway drivers, the capability to learn route knowledge and to know it to the degree they do is unbelievable. And the understanding that man has of the rail network is incredible. He just knows where everything is, and not just one route, loads of routes. I mean, he just knows every little inch of the railway, and that's a talent that neurodiverse people have.
Yeah,
there's these great memories and these great sort of ability to understand the entireties of things. I think so. The railway industry should be a natural home for the people who are neurodiverse, and we should be trying to make sure that's an accommodating world for someone who's autistic or any other version of neurodiversity. As well as other diversities. I mean, rail is actually very good at that, I think, in creating those environments. We sell ourselves as a place that is a good place for people to be, and there's careers here for people who are neurodiverse. The planning teams would probably look at themselves as that kind of skill set. So railway timetable planning is definitely sitting in that complex problem solving, seeing patterns kind of thing. So yeah.
Brilliant. So tell me about Brio.
Well,
show me out.
So, try and keep the story quick. When the pandemic hit, we got stuck at home, as everyone did. And my little boy used to go to nursery. We used to cross the railway every day to see the trains. We stopped on the bridge and wave at people. And when that happened, when the pandemic hit, we couldn't see the trains anymore. He got pretty upset. So I started making him little model trains of the ones we saw going under the bridge, so that he was comforted by it and he loved them. We made little 3D printed trains and we painted them up, and he started getting quite good at making those trains. And about a year ago, I decided that so many people liked them that we should probably see if we could make them as products. So you're the very first people to ever see this.
Big reveal. Look at those. Oh, wow. They're brilliant. I love them. I absolutely love them. I'm going to just put my specs on. I can put that's just brilliant. Absolutely love them, Mike.
So as you'd expect, they're quite techy.
Yeah.
They've got little data connectors on the end of each coach.
Right.
So as you connect the train together, and you hit the buttons, which lights up and it's motorized, But these are obviously the class 450s that SWR operate up and down south of England. And they run as there's 4 coaches, and there's 3 sets of 4 to make a peak 12-car service.
Right.
So the reason we have these little data connectors is that I can take 3 of these trains, couple them all together, and they will all run as a 12-car train.
Right.
Which entertains my little boy no end. So you can then run real trains. So the idea of the company that we're setting up, which we're going to call Real World Trains, is that we'll make, with the support of the industry, little model trains for the Brio wooden track system that look like the real railway trains that are out there at the moment. And there are plenty of children who are neurodiverse who one of the features of autism is your fingers and your fine motor skills are quite poor as a child, and your learning is delayed. So my little boy is 6, but actually in maturity he's only about 4. So those trains are perfect in terms of his ability to play with them and manage them and put them on the track. They're ideal. So that's why we've created them. So the idea is we create these trains, we'll sell them to the marketplace for those who want them, and the money we raise from those will be donated to autistic charities in the UK. And we're getting some nice support from the railway operators in the UK to allow me to use the branding to make the models to sell.
Okay.
The long-term ambition of the business is actually to create job opportunities for people who have neurodiversity or ADHD problems, and that there's lots out there who struggle to find work because employers won't give them opportunity. So that eventually, if we get big enough, we'll employ people in marketing roles and social media roles and product development roles. And through the work we're doing, we're actually meeting quite a number of people who are autistic, ADHD, who actually are product designers and marketing people, and they tend to freelance because they struggle with working environments. So the idea is we'd eventually be able to give people working opportunities to give them basically a foothold on the career ladder, which then would allow them to springboard into more broader industry jobs.
Yeah.
So that's the idea of what we're trying to do.
That is brilliant. And in terms of my earlier question and what inspires you, when I hear these kind of stories, that inspires me. I think what you're doing, what's come from your little boy missing seeing the trains going backwards and forwards on his way to nursery, to you then coming up with this concept, making it happen, and thinking beyond that. This isn't just you making a toy for your son to play with. The knock-on effect of that is significant. And then that bigger picture aim in relation to this is about creating job opportunities and improving the environment, the atmosphere, the kind of the overall outlook for people who have got neurodiversity challenges to deal with in a what we might call a normal working environment. How do we change that? And so that is that's really, from my perspective, that's really inspiring, Mike. So I really appreciate you sharing with that, and to have that exclusive flash of the set is absolutely brilliant as well. I've really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I knew I would. I find you really such an interesting person, and I could talk to you for hours. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I've really enjoyed it. You've kind of really set some different thought processes off in my head, which I always appreciate, different ways of thinking. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day, and yeah, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. It's been a privilege. Thank you.
My huge thanks to Mike for sharing his career story with us on this episode of the Intuitive Insights podcast. Please do join us again for the next conversation.